Hello, Silas, back here with Steven. Say what's up.
Hello, everyone.
We're continuing to read the secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. Finding different ways to say that each time. Tell us a bit
Sure.
about this.
Sure. So this is an article, a brazen article, might I add, from Time Magazine, talking about, let's just say, some arrangements that occurred behind the scenes to help get the desired outcome of the 2020 election.
Yeah. And we've been going through this by reading like each paragraph. I found out about this, Stephen found out about this in his own way and decided, oh, let's actually do this. So I'd seen some accusations of people being like, you're just going to comment on this without actually reading the article. What are you talking about? It's like, no, this is content that I knew of. So part of this was like, I didn't feel the need to read it because I thought it was going to be a lot of things that I actually knew of from the quotes and things that I pulled out. But I figured, hey, other people might not have read it and we could learn something from hearing, reading, talking, communicating, having conversations. So instead of just reading it myself, I thought let's get Stephen here, and it's been going well so far.
Yeah.
My whole thing with this is nothing so far has been illegal. I
Nope.
think this is X that happened. So these people thought since we all saw X, Trump and other people have been telling you it's Y and all these other things, but this is it's not those things. It's Z or no, they've been telling you it's Z or whatever. X happened. Other people have been telling you what they think it is. This is us telling you what it actually was. So this is, to me, that's a positive thing. Get the actual information out there and have this conversation and talk about it and see. And I guess we might just jump into it unless
Yeah.
Stephen has more to say. This is part 5, and we've been actually giving me a little more info, and this is the second one we're recording today. So if you want to hear our general thoughts about other things outside that are not related directly to the content, you can listen to the one previous to this one, which was what was the one previous to this one was called the disinformation defense.
That was it.
And
Yeah.
right now we're getting into spreading the word, which is it's not chapter, it's the it's the sixth section of
Yeah.
this actual thing. So we're going to get into it, right?
Yeah.
Right?
All right. Sure.
Right?
All right. Let's
Okay.
start off here.
So I'll lead off where I'll read a paragraph, then we'll discuss it, then Stephen will read a paragraph and discuss it. And each of these, we're trying to keep them to be around an hour, so we'll get as much in this hour, and then probably have at least one or two more parts to complete this.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
So spreading the word. Beyond battling bad information, there was a need to explain a rapidly changing election process. It was crucial to voters to understand that despite what Trump was saying, mail-in votes weren't susceptible to fraud. That it would be normal if some states weren't finished counting votes on election night.
All right, so that's either ignorance or an outright lie because there were issues with mail-in voting even shortly before this election. There was, what was it, Paterson, New Jersey, there was a scandal. New York City, a lot of the mail-in votes were ineligible. There was something in Michigan, too. I had a list at one point. I don't have it in front of me, but it's like, no, there have been issues with mail-in voting. So again, it's either they're either lying about it or they just don't know, but either is possible. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know Molly Ball personally, so I can't speak for what she's saying, but it's definitely, this doesn't match reality.
And part of this with me was I was thinking I'd heard about this before, and this, as you'll see, it had been something that had been planned before the pandemic. So let's not think that, oh, it's a pandemic that happened, and then they were like, okay, we have to do this. But they've been doing some of these plans since Trump won. Like, you look at the actual things we mentioned in the last one, there's been actual articles about CNN talking about issues that are happening with these things. With mail-in voting in the previous elections, when it was about 40 million people voting, about 4% of the people who actually voted were found to be votes that they couldn't be counted. Now, all of a sudden, when it jumps up to 160 million people voting, it drops down to 0.03% of the people.
Yeah.
Now, they could say this is why we did it. We did it by having these plans, having the architect, having the securing the vote process, and that's how we dropped it down to this level. And they might go into more details of that. That's something that's clear that it might happen. When they talk about, oh, it's going to be normal for some states won't finish counting votes on election night. Sure. How come it was this certain key states? Most other states where the things weren't up for question, those seem to be able to count. And even if you're not able to count on election night, I was thinking, why don't you have a situation where you can at least say how many people voted? Now, counting what those votes were, that might take longer. But to say, we're sure that by this time, this many people have voted because this many people were registered and this many ballots went out when you're talking about mail-in voting. With mail-in voting, you should be able to know. you should be able to know that we sent out this many votes and this many came in, or these are still actually many people requested, because we in most states you couldn't just send out unrequested ballots. I think those things might have been changed in some places where they were just sending unsolicited ballots out to people. There definitely were reports of people receiving ballots in their homes of people who hadn't lived there, like multiple things coming to
Yeah.
those locations. Those are very clear and actually there.
Yeah.
There's evidence of it getting to just some PO box of some people who are registered to a location. It's not a residential place. These examples do exist. So
Yeah.
this whole idea to say they weren't susceptible to fraud, it's yeah, as you said, it's either a bold-faced lie or they're just aware of different information that we have. I don't want to assume the worst about Molly Ball here, but I don't know where they're coming from on that.
Well, like, okay, like my friend Abram, his brother got 2 military ballots. And the thing is, his brother never even served in the military, and he got 2 of them. Tim Pool got a mail-in ballot for someone who didn't live there. I know there have been stories of people saying they requested mail-in ballots, and then they didn't get them, and then they went to vote in person. They said a ballot was already cast in your name. So it's like, there have been issues here. I mean, again, is it 10%, 5%? You know, we can debate that. But to act like, oh, there's nothing wrong with the system, why are people saying anything? It's not true.
Yeah. And it did begin with that. It began with there was no fraud, and then it was like, okay, there was no evidence for widespread fraud. Okay, there's evidence of actually fraud in different places, but it's not enough evidence to show that would have overturned the election. Those are the kind of sliding bar kind of thing that we actually saw, and those are the questions that I still think are up in the air.
Sure.
But again, still nothing so far has been illegal. So we need to repeat that. We need to reiterate that. For those of you who object to this and think it's brazen like we do as well, there still hasn't been anything in here that I see is illegal based on the laws that I am aware of with politics. I've seen other things like on this website, hereisevidence.com, that has actual data points where there's question marks, but nothing in here so far has been legal.
Yeah, it reminded me of that case in Pennsylvania during the election where they threw it out and they said there were poll watchers in there, but the poll watchers were made to stand on the other side because they were worried about COVID. And that was a defense. Meanwhile, you have the counters sitting side by side. And then the judge threw out and said, well, technically the poll watchers were in the room, so it's not an issue. It's like, come on. I mean, yeah, technically that follows the law, but does that sound like a good faith argument to you? No, come on.
Yeah, and those are the questions that I think are still going unanswered as we're spreading the word here. Okay, so hit us up with the next paragraph.
All right, sure. Let's see here. Dick Gephardt, the Democratic former House leader turned high-powered lobbyist, spearheaded one coalition. That's interesting. They admit he's a lobbyist. Quote, we wanted to get a really bipartisan group of former election officials, cabinet secretaries, military leaders, and so on, aimed mainly at messaging to the public, but also speaking to local officials, the secretaries of state, attorneys general, governors who would be in the eye of the storm, to let them know we wanted to help, says Gephardt, who worked his contacts in the private sector to put $20 million behind the effort. Sure. All right.
Okay. So this is the thing, like you said, it's interesting they mentioned that he was a lobbyist. Some of these things have kind of changed around, where I think they're beyond the point of pretending they don't really support old white male politicians, because apparently the oldest, one of the most wealthiest, most politically connected politician ever got the most popular votes ever. So I guess that's what they like. They talk about in the past how it's like, oh, it's about popularity is the one that decides things. But in the previous chapter, we were talking about how they were like, oh, on Facebook and these platforms, these things, when you engage with them, they become popular. So we need to actually take them off. We can't just be like, oh, the algorithm says this is popular, so let's put most of it. It's like, no, they're not about the popular vote. They don't really care about popularity in that sense. It depends on what's actually being said. They're not for like people just the popular things being the things that are heard by people. Come on, man. They don't care about that. Come on, man. Like Biden says, like they don't care about that. And some of this, like I said, I'm glad that we can put these things to rest. And maybe they'll still say it, but like I said, for some people, they don't really care about standards. They say things to say things. But for the people who care about actual evidence, there's just more and more evidence for certain arguments to say, okay, if you hear someone say that, ask them this, and if they acknowledge that, then we can talk. If they don't acknowledge it, there's no point. There's probably not much point to keep engaging with them unless it's like in a public venue where other people might see you engaging with that person and learn something from it. But now you can just get to a point where the people who are willing to actually engage in conversation, instead of just preach to each other and talk to people want to listen instead of just being heard.
Yeah.
Those people who want to engage in conversation, there's more evidence, there's more information, there's more things and platforms and ways for people to actually get to that understanding versus just talking. So I think when you come to that, that's kind of a positive thing.
Well, it almost reminds me of what Michael Malice always points out about free speech. The right and the left are both hypocrites on this because it has to do with who has power and who doesn't. Like in the 50s and 60s, the left was all about free speech because the right controlled cultural institutions, all that. So they were the one about, yeah, man, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, all that. And then it was the right they were the ones censoring things on TV, parental advisory labels, all that. The left gains power. All of a sudden, political correctness takes over. You can't say this; it's hate speech. You can't say this; you'll offend people. You can't say this. Then the right starts saying, "Hey, we need freedom of speech." So again, it's the hypocritical thing of it just if we're in power, we want to censor our opponents. We're out of power. Well, we want to have the right to say what we want. You know.
Yeah, and that's something that's common, and it's something we all do. We all have our biases, like we mentioned before. We have certain biases coming in this content, and it's in there, and people need to acknowledge these things. And for me, one of the primary things that made me acknowledge it was looking at sports and things like that, and realizing that I was in high school and middle school in the DC area, and I was a Redskins fan at that time by default because that's the team there. Yeah. And then most of the team I didn't like was the Dallas Cowboys because of their opponent's team. But you look at most people in this area happen to be with one of those teams. Very few people in other teams. Then you go to school. I go to school in the Ohio Valley area. It's Pittsburgh fans. But then you actually go talk to the actual people there and be like, okay, name me like 10 players. They'll name you like maybe the main, like the quarterback, like the main cornerback on defense, maybe a defensive end, the running back, a wide receiver. Maybe they'll name you the head coach, nobody really else, because it's just kind of a thing that they default. They're biased towards supporting that team, and that's a situation where the bias itself exists, and almost all of us have those to some extent in some aspects of our lives. That's not overtly negative. It's not inherently negative to be biased towards something, but you see the thing, by supporting this team, that makes you choose which games you're going to watch, which people you're going to go. Sometimes you might have certain preferences of certain colors. Sometimes you might get deeper into that where you feel some connection to somebody who happens to like that or dislike that, or you might actually, it might affect your spending habits. So those are kind of things that you see from something rather mundane like a sports team. Now, when you take that bias further to something like politics, that's where it starts getting more dangerous. And I think that's why you should be at least aware of it and be very suspicious of people who either pretend they're colorblind and have no biases, or the people who just don't actually even acknowledge or see that they actually have them. I think those are the two people on the ends that I think are worth being aware of and kind of planning to deal with them with that knowledge being there.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, if you look at a state like Jersey, how the sports teams they follow depend on where they live in the state. Like, people in the north tend to like Jets and Giants, but you go south, it's Philadelphia Eagles fans because it's closer to Philly. So, like, things like that are kind of interesting, how it's like the one, not a huge state, densely populated. I think it is the most, I don't know if New Jersey is the most densely populated state. I think it may be, but it's like, you know, within that one state, they differ, but it's just based on those regions. So, down south, it's, you know, it shows in other things, too. Like, people from Philly in that area go to Wildwood, but then if you're up north, you go to Long Island or Long Beach Island, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and these kind of things are based on. That's why I'm not against discriminatory people discriminating and things, people having biases. These are things that we evolved with and made perfect sense. Like the tribes, the clans, and things like that devolved because you would live in a certain area, and those people were more exposed to certain pressures that you had, and by being successful in that area, they had learned certain ways of behaving, certain behavioral patterns that were more familiar with you. They would probably understand you more. So there was very many reasons to actually have these biases. But now that the world has become globalized and things are more mixed up, I think there's a lot more mixed up signals in this. And in our series about the cracks in the ivory tower, we're talking about 95% or something like that of Americans now have been through high school. Yeah. And that environment in high school is maintained throughout. For many people, it remains and shapes the way they actually deal with the reality and the expectations. And with most high schools in the compulsory schooling system, it's kind of an arbitrary line of who goes to what school. Like you might have had your best friend until elementary school, go to the same elementary school, and then depending on the lines that you lived in, all of a sudden you now go to different schools, you join different sports teams, and you end up being on a rival school, and then you don't really talk to that person that much anymore. There's all these things can go just like kind of based on an arbitrary line. Yeah. And those things decide many things in life. And I think that kind of continues. People thinking that arbitrary nature of just geographically happening to be in one place versus another is enough to base major decisions in your life off of. Yeah. And for me, that's not something that I think for me, in part, I wasn't raised that way just because of moving around. Where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, once I was starting to establish some of these kind of connections and biases and cultural traits, everything changed. All of a sudden, you're in different continents, speaking different languages with like entirely different things. So it's like, okay, relearn these things and try to figure out how the different things that are done here. So that's kind of just some general thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's like I remember somebody saying a while back in elementary school or high school or something. They were like, "Oh, these people are going to be your friends for life. There's some future husbands and wives." I barely talked to anyone I went to high school with. I talked to like there's a few people I talk to regularly, then there's a few that like will comment on each other's posts and stuff, but like that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't feel like I have to have some innate loyalty to people who just happen to live in the same arbitrary lines as I did years ago. I don't feel some connection based solely on that. No.
Yeah. Okay. So next one.
Yep.
Okay. Wamp, the former GOP congressman, was it Wamp or Wamp? Wamp? How would you say this?
Let's see.
Like lamp?
I would say Wamp. I don't know.
Wamp? Okay.
Wamp.
Wamp, the former GOP congressman, worked through the nonpartisan reform group Issue 1 to rally Republicans. We thought we should bring some bipartisan element of unity around which constitutes a free and fair election, Wamp said. The 22 Democrats and 22 Republicans on the National Council of Election Integrity met on Zoom at least once a week. They ran ads in 6 states, made statements, wrote articles, and alerted local officials to potential problems. We had rabid Trump supporters who agreed to serve on the council based on the idea that this is honest, Wamp said. This is going to be just as important, he told them. No, this is going to be just as important, he told them, to convince the liberals when Trump wins. Whichever way it cuts, we're going to stick together.
All right, so this goes to what I keep saying about how they keep trying to do this whole bipartisan, nonpartisan unity, all this. Again, it's rhinos and Democrats versus populists like Trump. That's how I see it. And in fairness, you can kind of see this with the Democrats, like someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who has a big fan base, including from some right-leaning and libertarian types, but the establishment doesn't like her. So people keep framing it as Democrat versus Republican when it should really be more like establishment versus populist, and then some entangling alliances kind of in there.
Yeah, and another thing here is one thing I saw people say was, okay, if you're going to do this whole situation where, how about this? Instead of this unity that you're talking about, we're just going to treat your administration, the left administration, the same way you treated Trump's administration for the last 4 years. We're just going to fall back on not my president. We're going to fall back on being the resistance. Yeah, whatever. We'll stop saying it was stolen, but that entire 4 years, that's what we're going to do. Would people accept that? And that doesn't seem to be something most of these people are accepting. These people seem to say, and maybe these people would argue and say they were seeing the way people on the left were unconvinced, and they're saying, okay, that's why. Maybe they're saying if we had this happen, then the left would be saying not my president for this entire 4 years.
Yeah.
And I still haven't seen that argument being established. But I mean, when people were setting up to have those protests, as they opened this article with those hundreds of protests, what were those people basing those hundreds of protests on? Weren't they already going in with the general assumption that it actually wasn't going to be a valid type of thing? Part of them running this whole project, weren't they kind of thinking Trump is actually going to be in there messing up the election, so we need to do these things? Isn't that their argumentation for this? So this whole idea that, oh, it's just people on the right, it's not accurate. And I guess here they said, okay, this is also to convince the liberals when Trump wins. And as I said, some people might truly have believed that Zach Wamp might be on the up and up with this, but that's what's being listed here. And to me, it's positive. And for me, getting the information out there, and I think part of the way that what happened on January 6th could have been avoided was if there had been more court cases, and supposedly if everything was in the up and up, like they're supposedly saying here, nothing has been legal yet, and that was presented in courts, that was presented on CNN, they were saying, okay, look, they've said this, but look, this is the statute. This is the actual statute. Nothing was violated here, so that's okay. Yes, you're seeing these people in Georgia pulling these things out of the under the tables, but no, here's an interview with the person. This is their lawyer. They're telling us they can say this. This is actually what they were doing, and actually this was counted. And this is 10,000 votes, so this is not enough for this. Those kind of things would have helped, and those are the kind of things that I think still need to be done if they want to have some success in saying that, oh, we want a situation where there isn't this mess that you happened on January 6th, and more things are going to happen. There's going to be more disunity, more people. The term that I was using was not disengaging, divesting from society in a sense, where it's going to be not disunited, but a divested states of the United States of America, which to somebody who has some secessionist type sympathies could be positive in a sense if it's more people taking on taking on the agency and wanting more control in their lives in the local level versus relying so much on the federal. That could lead to be an actual positive thing.
See, black people like secession too.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm also not really a typical black person. And then when you talk about like the ADOS, which in my mind is like the main primary people in the United States of America, of which I am not. I mean, I'd be like the ADOS in the sense African descendant of trans-Saharan slavery, if anything. I haven't really double checked to see if any of my ancestors were put through the trans-Saharan slavery. But if my ancestors were subject to any sort of foreign slavery outside of the local slavery that occurred in African tribes, it would have been trans-Saharan going across the Saharan desert to the Middle East. But yeah.
Well, to your point too about the courts, like that's something that I kept harping about. I was like, if these things had gone to trial, they went through all the evidence, judges, juries, all that, and they said, based on this, there isn't enough to change the results, overturn. Okay, fine. At least they gave it a chance and it failed. But if it's, no, we're not even going to look at this, that just creates resentment. They were saying, I was thinking back to learning about the history about the World Wars. They said that was one of the things that upset a lot of people, World War I with Germany. Remember, in the World War I, Germany was never invaded. It was all fought in France, Belgium, that area. But the fact that they surrendered without Germany being invaded, people saw it as a stab in the back because it's like we weren't fighting to the end. Whereas second time around, okay, Berlin was in ruins. At that point, there's nothing you can do. And at that point, I mean, I think people wanted to surrender earlier. But of course, Hitler wanted everyone to fight to the death. But the idea, I think, was that at that point, there's nothing you can do. It's like, okay, we've lost clearly. Whereas the first time around, it was debated, could we have kept going? And that was a similar sort of feeling with this. It's like, you know, we could have taken it to court. We could have looked through all this. A jury might have been convinced, but that chance was never even allowed. So that created all that resentment. Yeah.
That's a good seeing the many takes that people normally mention with World War and those kind of situations. I think that's a nice apt comparison.
Yeah.
But yeah. And here's up with the next one.
All right, sure. Okay, let's see here. The Voting Rights Lab and Into Action created state-specific memes and graphics spread by email, text, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, urging that every vote be counted. Together, they were viewed more than 1 billion times. Wow. Protect Democracy's election task force issued reports and held media briefings with high-profile experts across the political spectrum, resulting in widespread coverage of potential election issues and fact-checking of Trump's false claims. The organization's tracking polls found the message was being heard. The percentage of the public that didn't expect to know the winner on election night gradually rose until by late October it was over 70%. A majority also believed that a prolonged count wasn't a sign of problems. Quote, we knew exactly what Trump was going to do. He was going to try to use the fact that Democrats voted by mail and Republicans voted by person to make it look like he was ahead, claim victory, say the mail-in votes were fraudulent, and try to get them thrown out. Quote, end quote, says protect democracy's basin. Setting public expectations ahead of time helped undercut those lies. All right.
Yeah, okay, again, I think a simple thing that could have answered some of this was, as I mentioned, just saying, okay, we might not be able to tell you who voted for who at this time, but we can at least tell you that this many people have voted on the day of. I think that's a simple thing that you can do, especially if supposedly they could plan this ahead of time. And why did majority of the places do? Like, it seems to be that 95 or 19 over 95% of, so if they talk about most of 93% of the protests were peaceful, and that means they're mostly peaceful, then over 93% of the counties that voted were able to at least say on election day that this is the number of votes that are out there. This is the number of votes that we still have yet to count. That was something that was not done in the Philadelphia county. That was something that was not done in the Georgia county. Those are the kind of questions that they could have dealt with. This is something they could have done. So if they're saying they were aware of what Trump was going to say, that to me could have addressed some of those things. When they had something like in Philadelphia, I think they said the number that was listed, there was a discrepancy of 2 million. And then they start talking about, that's just local people messing things up with certain things. And yes, I don't really have a high regard on the selection process of how certain things are awarded to when you talk about public sector things. So it could simply just be a clerical error. It could
Yeah.
simply just be a thing where CNN and all these other places that were covering it happen to have a system of reporting the numbers where it turns out that there was big jumps towards Biden's side because of the way they're accounting on the things and they're reporting the things. These are things they knew earlier,
Yeah.
I think, ahead of time, but they still did it. There's still something they could have known. If they knew ahead of time that, oh, we're not going to be able to count these on the same time, then why is it that they couldn't have said before Trump came out on the night of and came out and said, yeah, you know, at 4 o'clock is going to be a shutdown, mysterious things. Why are they stopping the count? Why couldn't they have told people ahead of time that, yes, guess what? When it comes down to election night, we're not going to be able to count them. If we're not able to count them all on election night, we're going to shut down at 4 p.m. They could have
Yeah.
simply announced that. These
Yeah.
things could have helped the process, but these were things that were not done.
Yeah. Well, and it drives me nuts too, because I remember people like Brian Stelter saying, "Oh, we don't know who the president's going to be for weeks. This could go on for weeks, all this." But then when his guy was winning, suddenly it's, "Oh, why is Trump fighting this? Clearly he lost." It's like, come on, I see what you're doing here. And then there were, I'm trying to remember the number now, but how many sworn affidavits of people saying they saw suspicious things? They're all, and the thing is too, people don't get it. Like an affidavit, it's like, if you lie on an affidavit, you're lying under oath. I mean, you can go to jail, all this. And I know somebody tried to rebut this with me. They're like, well, they could be pardoned. It's like, Trump was going to pardon hundreds or thousands of people all lying under oath. Can he even do that? I don't think so. Because then it's like, there are limits to, I mean, the president, I have to look it up, but you can pardon some people. You can't pardon everyone, because then the president could just say, hey, my friend here has a relative in jail, let them out. Hey, my friend here has a relative in jail, let them out. It's like, I don't think you have that kind of power. So all the thousands of people taking risks to lie under oath, and lawyers too, if you get someone to lie under oath on an affidavit, you can get disbarred. It's like your whole career is done. So I'm having trouble believing all these people would lie under oath, plus they got death threats, media attacks, all this. Like, why would people do all these people do all of that unless there was something shady going on? Yeah.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't take all, even if just one of them was right. And an added thing to that is, now that Biden is in, the vote has been secured, as people say. If supposedly there are actually people who have were actually lying about these things, unlike situations like in the in the Brett Kavanaugh situation, where people did come on, and I think they might have sworn affidavits, but people do lie. People do lie for various reasons. Like we said, with the power thing, people might truly think we need to save America. God sent. There might be people who think God sent Trump to save the chosen country, and we need to do all these things, and kind of embellish their minds. Or so people seriously see something and they think something else in their head. But when it comes to a simple thing like someone's like, look, I'm signing an affidavit that I was kicked out and refused to enter, and I have this on, and here's me on cell phone trying to get back in. That's a clear thing. When somebody says, "Oh, that never happened," I'm like, "Okay, come on now. Like, that's actually been said." And for these people who think these people are lying, do they now think that in Biden's America, with Biden's judges, like, you're going to get a situation where they're going to go through the legal process and find these people, disbar the judge, disbar the people. They're going to go in and actually get the people who lied under oath and actually have some legal remedies to them? Or will this be more of a hushed out situation? That's something that I'm waiting to see. But I think many of the people who are decrying this are at the point where they're already disengaged. You look at the numbers of the people actually watching the impeachment trial. You look at the viewership of lots of these mainstream media locations. Those things are dropping. Most people aren't really that into this.
No.
Now they're just like, oh, the big threat, the big bad orange man is gone. Let me just go back to regular life, and everything else will be handled. And I think that's the way things go.
And it's interesting too, because I mean, there are those woke fanatics who won't talk to me regardless, but there were some moderate Democrats who supported Biden who are are a bit friendlier now, because they see it as, we got our desired outcome. Okay, I'm not going to be worked up all the time. Let's try and work things out a little. Again, there are the woke fanatics who won't talk to you unless you agree with them on everything. But there are people, it's not so much that, it's this whole unity and healing thing. They're not that extreme, but they're starting to calm down a bit, where it's like, okay, they're willing to have conversations and things.
Yeah, and most people in general are more gracious in victory and things like that. So they consider they win. They're allowed to bask in whatever glory that win has. But like for me, I'm not sure if I take the stuff too personal. I'm still just like, okay, on a engagement to engagement basis in most of the things. Are we going to engage on actual details? And I'm going to also wait and see how consistent are these people in expecting certain things from Trump as they do from Biden's administration, from Biden's America. So people were like the kind of person who was saying, "Oh, Trump killed like 300,000 people." Those are the kind of people that I don't really engage in because that's just an absurd claim. What kind of
Yeah.
connection are you making there? Because I asked those people, are you now saying that Biden has killed 60,000 Americans in
Yeah.
his first 3 weeks in office because now it's in Biden's America and that's
Yeah.
how many people are supposed to have died of coronavirus? Or is it still Trump's deaths until like a year from now, 100 days? What is the actual switch? So those are the kind of people that I'm like, I don't know. And
Well,
one more thing I think is here,
sorry, go ahead.
count every vote. Sorry, just one last thing. Count every vote. It's like not every vote counted. This is the kind of thing where they say one thing and then you push them on it and they say, believe all women. You mean all women, no matter what they say? It's like,
Yeah.
no, it depends on the evidence and the situation and the time. So it's not like believe all women. It's like depending on what they say. So count every vote, even illegal votes, even if illegals vote, even if the kids vote, even if it's like something that comes in, even if there's not. No, we actually mean count every vote. That's people that are allowed to vote. We need to find ways. Then I'm like, no. Why don't you just write count every legal vote? Why can you just add that one word there? Because I think there's that discrepancy, and that's one of the things that I think we noticed in this, again, great graphic that was done for the cover. Count every vote. That was a thing where that was something that came up with Trump, and they're saying, oh, Trump doesn't want the votes to count. He wants them to shut down. And
Yeah.
like, I literally watched him come out in that speech on the night of, and he was saying, why have they stopped counting?
Yeah.
Why aren't they still
Yeah.
counting? The next morning, people were saying Trump is trying to get them to stop counting. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So that's the kind of thing that I was seeing there.
Well, what you just said too reminded me of what I said about the economy, about Bush versus Obama versus Trump. Obama, all we heard, it's Bush's fault, it's Bush's fault. Well, into Obama's second term, well, it's still Bush's fault, it's still Bush's fault. Economy does better under Trump. Well, this is thanks to Obama. It's like, I don't engage people like that because I know you're just partisan hacks who will just find a way to spin it so your side is somehow responsible for the good, the other side's for the bad. I mean, can you give me specific policies to support those arguments, or is it just things are good, it must have been the result of your guy, things are bad, it must be the other guy? Because now next time a recession hits, which could be near future, I'm sure somehow it's going to be blamed on Trump, even though it's like, okay, Trump's out of office, this was supposed to be unity, healing, all this. So I don't engage people like that anymore. It's not worth the time.
Yeah, those are the religious people, because like if it's bad, it's the devil.
Yeah.
The devil among us, the devil has done something. If it's good, it's God's mysterious plan. That's kind of how they just switch back and forth with it.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so here we have a photo of Amber Reynolds with Zach Wamp and Maurice Mitchell.
Yep.
So yeah, there we go. So yeah, hit us up with the next paragraph.
All right. The Alliance took a common set of themes from the research Shanker Osorio presented at Podhorser Zooms. Studies have shown that when people don't think their vote will count or fear casting it will be a hassle, they're far less likely to participate. Throughout the election season, members of Podhorser's group minimalized incidents of voter intimidation and tamped down rising liberal hysteria about Trump's expected refusal to concede. They didn't want to amplify false claims by engaging them or put people off by voting, suggesting a rigged game. When you say, quote, these claims of fraud are spurious, what people hear is fraud, end quote. Shanker Osorio says, quote, what we saw in our pre-election research was that anything that reaffirmed Trump's power or cast him as an authoritarian diminished people's desire to vote, end quote. So.
Yeah. And with this, anything that, who was saying this? Who was casting him as an authoritarian if it wasn't people on the political left or the left leaning? It wasn't the mainstream media saying all these things about him. Another thing they're talking about, the vote won't count type of thing. These are the same people that talk about my popular vote. Yeah. When they understand, this shows that some of the people understand that if you're in California and it's just, people just think that this is going to go red anyway, it's going to go blue anyway, they're not going to participate that much because they know, like in New York City, we lived there. When we lived there, we're talking to people. People were like, some of the people were like, oh, I'm amazed that there's this many actual conservative-minded people. There's many Republicans. There's many people who are libertarians. First of all, I was telling them, like, the libertarian movement in general kind of came up in New York City. Like, it's still a massive place. There's still like 8 million people in the Manhattan metro area, in those boroughs. And then you look at the greater New York City area, it's like 20 million people. It's a lot of people. So even if it's only 10% Republican, libertarian, conservative, that's still 2 million people. So you're still going to find the actual people. But when it comes to actually voting, that 2 million people is in no way, shape, and form enough to actually get things over. Even though it's like only the registered voters, of the eligible voters, only 8% of them actually won in order to get de Blasio to be the mayor, which is like a really low number if you really think about this. But you look at some of these these, it was like, oh, this congressman from this district in New York City, and you think, wow, this person must be super popular. You look at the actual district, and like, it's like, oh yeah, they got 25,000 votes.
Yeah.
That got them into them into Congress. Like that's some of these things you actually do come down. It's like 3 or 4 votes, like the difference between the two people. It's kind of interesting to see when you actually look at local level. But anyway, this is part of the thing, and this is part of the things people are mentioning. Like when you have this election night type of thing, people calling races. Like Fox News called the Arizona race very early, and some people were thinking you're standing in line, and then you're listening to the news, and then somebody calls and says, "Oh, Arizona's been called for Biden." And you're thinking, okay, there's no need for me to stand in this line for 3 more hours, and then like some of the people decide to go home. So this is the kind of thing that I was thinking. Why don't you just have a system where you don't call stuff until you can actually call stuff? Then that avoids having that bump up where you can say this thing. Why do people feel the need to have that constant like, let's get the news in constantly? And I was also one of the people watching in different kind of things on the night of. So I guess I'm guilty in some way in that sense. But I was watching other things on the outside and listening to the things. But I don't put much weight into them until it's actually been called. So what would you think out there? What you also think, Stephen, you had a system where it's like, okay, we're not going to call anything until all the votes are in. We're not at least that. Start at that. Can we at least start at that to say, let's not start showing any tallies until we can at least say all the people who have voted have actually submitted it in, and now we're going to actually start telling you what's happened. So that would be, I think, a step.
Yeah, and I just didn't like some of the shady stuff, like what was going on in that county in Georgia, where they talked about like, oh, they shut down counting for the night, and then they're like, oh, the pipe broke. It turned out it was like a toilet overflowing or something, and then later they're like, oh, this never happened. But then it's like, I think it was Steven Crowder brought up footage of like 5 different news channels on the night saying this county in Georgia has stopped counting because of a pipe leak. It's like it's like this was literally a few weeks ago that they said this, and there's footage on like it was like ABC, MSNBC, NBC, Fox, and like one other CNN or something. So it's like guys, this was literally a few weeks ago, and I could dig up the footage easily. It's like, what are you trying to pull here? So,
yeah, those kind of things. It's just for saying it was the most secure.
Yeah.
For these people making that statement, and I said it's still ongoing. Maybe they think they can still massage the story, and these things change in time. Maybe a year from now, people will look back and say, "Oh, those things we were worried about then were not things we're concerned at all." Yeah. Think about the different way people are viewing. It's almost a year anniversary after the first big announcements of the ongoing pandemic. What's people's point of view of it at that time is now? Like we're having the thing with coming out. Look at the way people were looking at Cuomo a few months ago compared to now. Cuomo's up for re-election again in New York in 2022 or 2023. That's a year from now. He might have been able to spin and circle back to like the pre-pandemic type of idea, or that during pandemic kind of way. That these things are in flux. A lot of different things could happen. Aliens could all of a sudden. I think there was a thing that Trump actually signed in the thing of releasing certain information where there's supposed to be some dump of information from the Pentagon about like the unidentified flying activities that are so that we don't know. There's many things that could happen between now and a year from now. So we'll see how some of these things change.
Yeah, for real. All right. So
was it me? Was it you?
I think so. Wait, let's see. What was it? We saw
You started off.
I think I did. Yeah, because it was this one about the Alliance took a common set of themes right below the photo. That was the last one we read, right? And then Podhorzer, okay. That was the next one, yeah.
Okay, so here we go. Podhorzer, meanwhile, was warning everyone he knew that polls were underestimating Trump's support. The data he shared with the media organizations who would be calling the election was tremendously useful to understand what was happening as the votes rolled in. According to a member of a major network political unit who spoke with Podhorzer before Election Day, most analysts had recognized there would be a blue shift in key battlegrounds. The surge of votes breaking towards Democrats, driven by tallies of mail-in ballots, but they hadn't comprehended how much better Trump was likely to do on Election Day. Being able to document how big the absentee wave would be and the variance by state was essential, the analyst says.
All right. So, not really much to say on that, I don't think. I mean,
One of the
Yeah,
things
but
they talked
it
about
does
the
talk
amnesty,
about the
like
blue
this,
shift battleground states, and that's why I was so suspicious, like we just said about um, the counting state by state. It was like, oh, these certain states are settled, but the key battleground states, well, it's going to take a while, and you kind of wonder, like, okay, what's going on in that time, especially if they're not as populous as I'm assuming they have the right proportion of poll workers, all that. Like, there's some shady stuff going on, or there was, I should say. Yeah.
yeah, and you just look at the general coverage of the polls and things like that. They were talking about how from the break they're talking about, yeah, this is going to be a landslide. It's going to be an easy win for Biden. There's no questions. You look at the actual places. He's going to carry Florida. He's going to carry Ohio. So if they're saying, oh, we knew what was going to happen in these battleground states, why was the media still covering things up to the day the similar way that they were covering things in Hillary Clinton's 2016 loss to Trump? What actual process did these polls supposedly do better? You look at someone like the People's Pundit. He has this website, and peoplespundit.com or something. He's one of the pollsters that does different things, and he was been a lot more accurate on certain polls. And he just points out how, look, this are what the major polls were saying. These are the battleground states. These are the places they were saying, oh, plus 10 for Biden in this area. He ends up losing by 5. So when they have those kind of things, if there's actual evidence behind this, that's what I'm saying. I don't really see the evidence to them to say. Maybe it's because this was secretive. Maybe Podhorzer wasn't telling the general public these things. Maybe Podhorzer's group and the insiders, secretive cabal, knew these things, but the rest of the media didn't know these things because that was
Yeah.
not the messaging that was going on. That's the kind of things that I'm questioning with this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to jump to the next one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we've been recording for about 40 minutes, so I guess we can jump to this next one. It's only 3 paragraphs, so lead us off with the people
Right.
power, the first
Sure.
paragraph.
The racial justice uprising sparked by George Floyd's killing in May was not primarily a political movement. The organizers who helped lead it wanted to harness momentum for the election without allowing it to be co-opted by politicians. Many of those organizers were part of Podhorzer's network, from the activists in battleground states who partnered with the Democracy Defense Coalition to organizations with leading roles in the movement for Black Lives.
Um, it wasn't a political movement. What?
Yeah, I don't get that for the life of me.
The
I'm trying
same
to.
people who talk about how politics is personal.
Yeah,
The
politics
Black
is
Lives Matter group that had a website demanding certain things.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Oh, your privilege allows you to not care about politics. I've heard that said to me, which is weird
I
because
think
I'm all.
this goes to the thing where I was having a conversation with somebody I went to school with, and they're like, what's so wrong about it was pointing out there's Black Lives Matter and something else that was brought up, and he was trying to say that the thing wasn't political, and he was trying to mention. I think then he said, "What's so controversial about saying black matters, like the lives of Black people matter?" I was like, "Stop being childish! Like, what kind of moron do you think I am that I need you or somebody else to tell me that lives of certain demographic of people in the United States of America matter? Like, do you think I don't think that? Like, what kind of nincompoops do you think exists that need that like defined to them? And do you think we need an entire movement to just tell people that? And clearly, it seems that some people really do think other people are that dumb. And maybe some people are. Maybe I am giving people too much credit to say that people realize that. But even if you think that, I was wondering, what about me? Does that person think that this is something to bring up to me if I'm objecting to this? Do you think I don't realize that human lives matter, like in some sense? And do they think every life matters? Do they think, does my life, I know this was telling them, I was like, your life matters more to me than some random person because I know you. Like, I expect that your wife's life matters more to you than my life because I'm just some guy you know, whereas that's your wife. So even when it comes to that point, when it comes to the mattering, there's different values in this. And when you have a movement like this, you're telling me that people were in the streets with the George Floyd killing. They were saying the police is structurally racist. That has nothing to do with the political system. What are these people talking about?
Whenever they say, like, are you saying Black lives don't matter? One, that's like the most low IQ statement I've ever heard. Two, who actually believes that? I mean, okay, maybe there's some actual white supremacists somewhere advocating genocide who think that, but what is that, like 10 people? I mean, nobody is saying Black lives don't matter. Again, it's like, are they that stupid? Do they think we're this stupid? Like, I'm trying to get into the mentality of people who say this.
Yeah, and, okay, so again, let's be very specific. There are people saying that, but as you said, how few people are saying that? And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you bring that up, show me the person, and
Yeah,
then show me the place where I supported that person saying that.
yeah,
If you're not able to do that, then don't bring that noise to me. Go talk to
yeah,
that person
yeah,
that said that, and then we'll see. If you feel like maybe they feel like they're not able to reach out to those people because they know that somebody is that way. You also hear this thing, oh, you may not think this, but I live in this place in Idaho, and I went to this one small town, and I saw that someone was like, someone posted the whole like the OK symbol
yeah,
thing, and then I was kind of joking around. I have this thing called a Munga's razor, where I say, if you think about something in current year enough to state it, then someone somewhere has done, is doing, or will do it seriously.
yeah,
So somebody posted it, Charles, our friend, a mutual friend, posted
yeah,
like Saki doing that. Like, what does this mean again? Remind me. And then I was like, okay, I'm not even going to mention this because it's too absurd. Like, someone's going to come out and say like it doesn't count because it's the wrong direction. Like the P part of it
yeah,
was in front of the W, so it's not going to count. And then I saw it on my feed later, and somebody actually had mentioned that. It was like, no, it's the wrong side of it. I was like, what are you talking about? That is completely absurd. That has nothing to do with that. First of all, we don't believe it's a white power sign, so
yeah,
I don't believe then Saki's doing it from white power side. She might be. I don't know her personal premise on race and things like this,
yeah,
but that's I don't think that's a signal for it. But he's like, oh, you these people in this small town area, you should see the symbols they throw. They might believe that. And I'm like, yes, if people on the political right were dumb enough to fall for the whole like milk is a white supremacist thing and start drinking milk to show their race itself, those people are as gullible as people on the political left who are changing the ACLU and things like this and being in no news stories talking about how milk or the OK symbol. Those people are these dumb people who exist. So I get
yeah,
that, but don't bring that to me when we're talking about this. Go talk to those people. But maybe these people think if they can't reach these people, they need Nike, they need the NBA, they need the president to come out and say it on his grander scale and then reach those tiny communities. And somehow this hillbilly ass backwards dude who's literally throwing the OK sign, chugging down gallons of milk, will be sitting there and be like, man, LeBron James said Black Lives Matter and I like basketball. So all of a sudden now I'm like, I'm not racist anymore. Now I think Black Lives, what do they think is
yeah.
going to happen? It's so ridiculous.
And guys, they're always going to be random trolls online. They're idiots on the internet. You can't pick the most extreme, stupid examples and say, "Oh yeah, a general movement believes this." Like, I was talking about like, they say, "Oh, you're acting like racism doesn't exist." I'm like, "Who actually says that?" And I remember one guy was like, "Two people have said that to me in the last 10 years." I'm like, "Wow, okay, two people out of the hundreds or thousands you've interacted with." Yes, there are people who believe the earth is flat. There are people who believe, there was that thing Wilfred Riley shared too about there were people who believed, oh, the Freemasons were poisoning the water. There were people who believed that the clitoris didn't exist. Things like, yeah, there are idiots any place, anytime, wherever you look. That's reality. You can't pick the most extreme, stupid examples and hold them up as somehow indicative of a whole movement. That's not fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The actual people that literally make a racist decision
Yeah.
in the definition of racism to say, by simple virtue of you being genetically this race or clime,
Yeah.
you are this is superior to that other one. By that simple virtue is very small. So when they actually say that, it's kind of that general type of use of the term of
Yeah.
racism. And those kind of people, even just the regular surface level racism, it's a lot more acceptable to believe the world is flat and be in regular parlance and just talk about that and just be that way in the world, in the West, than it
Yeah.
is to be outright racist.
Yeah.
So even to that extent, you've done an amazing job of reducing the actual amount of racism. And it's already at the point where to be actually racist, functionally racist, and in society, it's very hard to do so.
Yeah.
So, like, if somebody is racist and they believe so, like you look at the Donald Sterling kind of situation where they said, oh, he was racist, so he had to sell the Clippers and things like that. If someone is racist, but they still pay people millions of dollars, black people millions of dollars, and they still date women of color, when it comes down to the actual practical nature, how much am I going to go? I don't feel I'm in a level of my life of comfort where I think it's even possible, even desirable to go in and change minds in that kind of sense.
Yeah.
But for some people, are like, oh, we actually need to change minds. We need to deprogram people. We in this kind of thing. I understand thoughts have actual effects, like your thoughts and beliefs are things you act on. But that's what I'm saying. If somebody thinks and believes a certain way, but doesn't actually practically act on it, still hires the black person. If somebody believes I'm not good enough to date their daughter because I'm a Negro, but they still let me into the store, or they still let me date her. They're like, what is the real issue?
Yeah.
Like when it comes down to it, like he must like me. He must not even he must like me. I must get it to a situation where he's not allowed to tell me he doesn't like me.
Yeah.
He must say he likes me, even if he doesn't actually like me. I must have a society and a situation where somebody makes sure for him to keep working, he must at least say he likes me. That's the thing, not just not say he doesn't like me, but people seem to be advocating for you have to affirm our stance. It's not enough to just be not racist. You have to be actively anti-racist. You know, that's the kind of thing that you have to be anti-racist. And James Lindsay has many really funny things in that. He's like, it's not enough to just be stupid. You have to be anti-intellectual. There was something that he said. He's been pushing that kind of thing in a really excellent way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say it was like I know a woman, for example, who's married to a black guy and has a kid, and I remember with the whole Kyle Rittenhouse thing, how she was getting defensive, and then like with the police shootings, she was getting defensive, and she was like, and she was like trying to like sort of talk it through with me, and I explained to her, I'm like, look, you understand, every time a black person gets shot by police, if your knee-jerk response is innocent black person shot by a racist cop for no reason, you just decide that a priori without looking at the facts. That is a political statement. That is an ideological statement. You're not going to say, okay, what happened here? Was the person doing something wrong? Was the cop wrong? Was there a scuffle between them? Did the person resist arrest and it got out of control? You're not even asking those questions. You just assume automatically, oh, it must be a result of systemic oppression. I'm like, that is an ideological claim. That is a political claim. And if, for me, I ask questions, and if the facts don't bear out that narrative, I'm gonna say, look, you're wrong. And again, you have to tell me why I'm wrong. But it's like, as we've talked about with Michael Brown, all these other people, it's like it doesn't usually follow that story. It's just people want that because they're ideologically driven to search for those conclusions.
Yeah. It's not a political movement. They're talking about George Floyd, talking about Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter began primarily after the hands up, don't shoot thing. That was a Michael Brown incident back in, it was during Obama's time. I think most people, I think a good 20% of the people you might ask might say that happened during Trump's time, or they at least say Black Lives Matter came about during Trump's like actual 4 years in presidency, because it's like memory hold the stuff that happened before. But it was in, or was it in St. Louis? Was it?
Yeah. It was that town, Ferguson. That was the name.
Ferguson, Missouri.
Yeah.
So it happened there, and then it's been found out in the same courts that people claim were so just to not listen to any case of Donald Trump, that they're not biased at all. They came out and they said that the cop did nothing wrong. He was actually acquitted of that. Yeah. It was found by multiple people who did research that there's no evidence that Michael Brown ever said hands up, don't shoot.
Yeah.
But that's something that's still in there. But this is totally not a political thing based on evidence, and it's based on evidence at all. It's simply mean that the lives of Black people matter. That's entirely what this is about. It's not political at all. That's what we're supposed to be.
And the thing is, too, that was cleared by Obama's Justice Department. Eric Holder is a left-leaning guy. The local authorities, too, they said, no, Darren Wilson's testimony checks out. He did try to take his gun. The discharge from the gun was on Michael Brown's hands, all that. It's like, and these are left-leaning people, Obama's administration. So if you have a problem with that, you have to take it up with local authorities and them. But they ruled that testimony was right. So,
yeah. I think the next paragraph, let's let us off to something there.
All right, let's see here. The best way to ensure people's voices were heard, they decided, was to protect their ability to vote. Quote, we started thinking about a program that would complement the traditional election protection area, but also didn't rely on calling the police, end quote, says Nalini Stamp, the Working Families Party's national organizing director. They created a force of, quote, election defenders, unquote, who, unlike traditional poll watchers, were trained in de-escalation techniques. During early voting and on election day, they surrounded lines of voters in urban areas with with a, quote, joy to the polls, end quote, effort that turned the act of casting a ballot into a street party. Black organizers also recruited thousands of poll workers to ensure polling places would stay open in their communities.
Yeah. Okay, so here I just have another question. If they had this ability to say, okay, first of all, it's as important as getting out there in the streets and protesting during the summer, it was something to risk during the pandemic, so we do that. Okay. So why wasn't it also as important to make yourself and get yourself out there to the actual polls? If you could have a block party and do this, suppose it's a pandemic, it's so dangerous, why party? Why didn't you figure out a system to get them into the polling place as fast as possible and get them back into their homes? Why have this whole party type of thing? And then just one last thing, is seeing that continually, is sex work? Is being on Tinder work? And then maybe people say like, oh, people are unemployed, so now they're on OnlyFans. Because they'll say, okay, that's not easy work. But I think that's work. Is being an influencer on Instagram work? You know, is being a when somebody's like, okay, they say, okay, the Black women have the most entrepreneurship. They have all these small businesses. They're small business owners and things like this. And it's like, okay, what does she do? Oh, she has this store where she just weaves people hair, and it's pretty much just her and like a few of her friends occasionally. And that's her company. She's a working person. So why is that person working people? But if somebody's like a CEO in some fortune in some tech company in Silicon Valley, and it's also him and two other friends, and they just code and things like that, they're not part of the working people because now they're making millions of dollars. That again is something that has come up in these series. It will keep coming up. It really grinds my gears, that working term, because everything people do in order to actually accomplish a goal, do something, put in some efforts towards something and change the thing that they're dealing with and impact it in a way, often to earn things or just improve their situation in life, is a form of work. So this whole situation of saying some work is work, but some workers are more equal than other workers, that's the kind of thing that's just it's something I consider detestable and just unneedingly divisive. Yeah.
Well, I would also push back a little against what you're saying. Actually, I wouldn't think in terms of labor. I think in terms of capital. With the OnlyFans, you're selling a commodity. People are willing to pay to see you, do whatever. It's not like, oh, you're physically doing labor to get that money. It's you're selling them a product that they want to offer. It may just be you putting on an outfit and, standing a certain way, or taking a certain outfit off and standing a certain way. But the point is, you're offering a product that people want and they're willing to pay for that. So it's like, if you want to make money in the same way, you have to offer that product. Again, if it's something you have to spend years on, if it's something, you can write some coding and come up with a program that does a certain service, either way, it's that product is what the people are paying for. So it's like, and plus, in line with our beliefs, I mean, people are paying for it voluntarily. Nobody forces you to join OnlyFans. You sign up for a subscription, that's on you. And you want to quit, you can quit.
Yeah, so maybe they can extend it to be more specific and say, okay, manual laborers or like industry laborers or that kind of thing could be more specific. But when you just say like workers, who aren't the workers that are involved in this in the economy? And it's normally that kind of situation where it's like a classist thing, where it's like you have to be in this set of things. Below that, you're not necessarily a worker. Above that, you're not necessarily a worker. But I think all those people are kind of working together, because someone will say, oh, we have to spend this time to get to this location to work for this other person. But at the same point, and then that person makes money. But if somebody, like you said, with the OnlyFans situation, these people go out and they do their jobs. And there's also some reduction with that, where OnlyFans, I think it already kind of plateaued in the number of women who are on there. And then a lot more women, and it's majority women who are making money off of that, come on. And for those who don't know, OnlyFans is kind of a site where it's like, it's kind of monetized the whole like chat room type of, I think it used to be done more on Snapchat, where you can have special accounts where you show normally salacious type of things and activities, and people pay you extra things to have that access to that. But you have a situation where now it also showed that a lot of the people the sort of man in the level that would spend money on OnlyFans wasn't really the sort of man who would get female attention outside of life. And then when you stopped interacting with people, those men were still there, kind of plateaued in the amount of people that go there. It's not like all of a sudden men that were out there active, dating people that had people all of a sudden started using it more. But regardless, the amount of actually discretionary money they had to spend and they were able to earn and spend on the women that were increasing on OnlyFans met with an issue where it was like, okay, now the women who were already on there were making less. The women who were coming on thinking they could make anywhere as close to what the women before were making when these other women were employed in other ways, that wasn't there. Then a few celebrities came on and cashed in, like it was like Bella Thorne or something came in. She announced it on her social media for like a couple of weeks. Then she went on for one day and she did like some basic normal photos that she normally posts on Instagrams, might have been just a little more risque. And she netted like $1 million in one day and then dipped out. People were like, oh, I can't believe these people are using it, they're using our platform this way. But it's just part of things. What is work in that sense? And
Yeah.
it's just, again, we're part of this thing. What is X? X is this. Some people say X is actually all these things. Some people say no, it's Y. So that's the kind of thing of don't assume people believe things are the way you think they are.
Well, again, to use
Yeah.
the actor analogy I brought up a few times, it's like, you can complain, oh, DiCaprio gets paid 25 million to star in a movie, but it's like how many people come and see that movie because he's in it. Like The Wolf of Wall Street grossed something like just under 400 million. So it's worth paying him 25 million because how many people will go there just to see him? Whereas you cast some no-name or a lesser-known actor, it's not going to have that appeal. So it's worth paying him that money up front on hand because of the projection that you're going to make way more than that later. And like you make more than enough to pay everyone's budget, everyone's salaries, plus some left over. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are calculations that people make all the time. We make that all the time when you cancel. Even I'm not even completely against cancel culture. Again, I'm more against people just pretending things don't exist that actually do exist.
Yeah.
Just completely support. One of the first times I actually put this out was when James Damore came out and he had this Google manifesto talking about the issues that were in there. And it was like, I think this is good. I think companies should just come out and say, we're going to hire on political standpoints. We're going to hire on social politics. They should ask, are you supportive of what's it called, of transgender rights? We want to know that. And there might be some benefit to get people that are on the same page in multiple social political issues that have nothing to do with the actual product that you're providing. They might have more cohesion to do that. So you get one company that's doing that, then you get another company that's like, we're just going to hire the best people who are able to actually produce this product and see who gets the most. And there might be a situation where this company might be able to actually produce better product, but society is in the situation where they think about more than just product, think about more than just results. Just like you look at the politics. They don't really care about, it's not necessarily kids in cages. Now that it's kids in overflow facilities, all of a sudden it's different. It's not like, there's no actual plan from the federal level to actually change the campaign, to change the virus. But instead of somebody saying it's going to disappear like a miracle, we'd rather somebody say there's nothing we can really do at this point to change it, but then, we're still going to fight. So the people like that. Some people just like a pat in their head as they have to do the thing that they have to do. So maybe that counts. Maybe there is a benefit to just saying Black Lives Matter, and we don't really care about the actual sport versus having another league who's like, we're actually just going to focus on the sport. So there might be a benefit to that, and let's at least admit that that is a thing that's actually happening, and those are the calculations that you have to make.
Yeah. All right.
So see, like I'm going to get into a new series called like I Know Great People. I'm just going to have conversations with people. Steven's going to be one of the first people on that, where I was thinking one of the major things was a questionnaire. And this is something that I thought when I was much younger, I think in college, earlier college years or even earlier, was it's a lot easier to figure out what people dislike. I find that it's probably easier to get along with people based on the things that you dislike rather than things that you like. I was thinking, what if you have a kind of online dating thing where it's not the things you like, but you list the things you dislike? And I think there might be a way to get there where you have like a question like, there might be some kind of connotation. It's like, do you like cheese? What kind of cheese do you like? Maybe there's a way to figure out if you sign up to make a video game and you just hire most of the people who like brie cheese. There might be something about liking brie cheese that makes you better at making video games. We don't know about these connections. So I think it's okay to ask these questions, okay to have the discrimination as much as you want in who you associate with. But let's just at least admit that that is what's going on. That's what people do, and that's what you're doing. That's what we do. That's what everybody else does, instead of pretending that cancel culture doesn't exist, or even saying that it's never negative. I think it's negative if it's not consistent. But if it's a thing that we do, it's the thing that we do.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so is it me?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. The summer uprising had shown the summer uprising had shown that people power could have a massive impact. Activists began preparing to reprise the demonstrations if Trump tried to steal the election. Americans plan widespread protests if Trump interferes with the election, which was reported in October. One of many such stories. More than 150 liberal groups, from the Women's March to the Sierra Club to Color of Change, from Democrats.com to the Democratic Socialists of America, joined the Protect the Results Coalition. the group now defunct now's defunct now's the group's now defunct website had a map listing 400 planned post-election demonstrations to be activated via text message as soon as November 4th to stop the coup they feared. The left was already the left was ready to flood the streets.
Well, all right. So uprising, yeah, I mean, wouldn't call that an uprising. Trump tried to steal the election. Well, according to them, I mean, if Trump had won, they would have said it was stolen anyway, just like they did in 2016. Protests, of course, that means riots. Sierra Club is an environmentalist group, but of course it's become entwined with all this other stuff now. There's that joke about how the environmentalist movement is Marxist and how they get called watermelons, green on the outside, red on the inside. Protect the results. Yeah. Okay. Activated via text. So what is that? Basically go out and riot if Trump won. It's like, they keep using the word protest. You ever hear anyone on the left say these are riots? No, it's always protests every time. It's like you just said a minute ago. Say it like it is. Like if you're gonna say we're rioting because we're oppressed, fine, that's the honest thing. Don't say peaceful protests. Like what? There was CNN, MSNBC, ABC, all had these screenshots of journalists saying, peaceful protests. There's literally buildings on fire behind them. It's like, guys, I'm not blind. I see fires behind you. Peaceful protest would be if there were people waving signs around or something or marching. Okay, fine. But I see buildings on fire. Don't tell me there was no violence.
I mean, the projection that's going on here, just one thing, imagine if we read this article, but every time there was Democrats, it was changed to Republicans. Every time somebody was mentioning something people thought Trump was going to do, say Biden or Hillary Clinton or things like that. This whole take that, they were waiting to see if Trump was going to steal. Why did they think it was going to be stolen before? All of a sudden, these people are on board with saying it's the most secure, protected election ever. Then why were they planning these things before the day if they thought it was completely secure?
Yeah.
Supposedly, these were people who were inside on these plans, right? So how come nobody was cluing them in that all these secretive, maybe because it was secretive cabal, like nobody really knew about these things, so they really thought Trump was going to be able to do these things. So why wasn't there messaging saying, don't worry about this? Why wasn't CNN telling people, don't listen to Trump? Like, things are actually secure. And maybe people will say, yeah, they actually were saying that, and they were countering what he was saying. So maybe that's something that they're going to say was there. But then I'm just, look at what happened in 2017, in 2016, after he won. Look at the people who were actually at the campaign. I was at the actual inauguration. I went there, and I saw people. There was people I was with in different groups. We're in different sections. There's people who were unable to actually enter the area because the area had been blocked off by counter-protesters. The people were protesting the event and not letting people go in. What was the evidence those people were basing that on? So this whole idea, they're waiting for Trump to steal the election. Do they think Trump stole the election at that time? The Steele dossier wasn't even out and circulating by that time, and that's been proven to be completely false. That whole idea is there. I also went there the next day for the Women's March and walked through the miles of that march and things like that with hundreds of thousands of people there. Those people were there. Those people showed up. What exactly were those people protesting? What attack on the democracy was going on in those people? When they were talking about impeaching Trump from that time, what was the attack on democracy people were talking about? And this is just the absurdities that's going on with some of these things, where it's like, okay, I understand what you're saying about this. And I still haven't seen them. And the only thing that I've seen addressing that is them saying earlier on, was saying, this is going to work because also, after this happens, if Trump wins, the liberals will be convinced by these things. But that's not really what I'm seeing. And maybe you're saying you've seen that with some of the people who are more even keel, more in the middle of the line, that bell curve, and not in the fringe, where they're like, okay, they've won, now they're becoming more friendly and things. I don't know. It's yet to see this whole idea of the unity. If supposedly these sources were telling them these people are literally Hitler, these people are racist, how are you just going to flip people over and say, yes, we told you these people were racist for the last 4 years, but let's have unity with the racists? I don't want to have unity with racist people. No. I want to know who the racist people are so I can avoid the racist people.
Yeah.
But these are just some of the questions that I'm wondering, and I think you still see there's some groups who are saying, unity, why? You told us these people are horrible. Throw them in jail.
Yeah.
We want to see these people in jail. We want the lists to actually get these people out there because we believe in the things you were telling us. Now you're telling us we need to be in unity. There was that one author who supposedly moved out to some more like smaller town area, and then her neighbors came over and shoveled her driveway, and apparently she wrote this thing on it was Twitter or somewhere else, and she was saying, "What am I supposed to do? Like these neighbors came, they have Trump signs in their yards, and like I feel like do I owe them anything?" She's like, "No, I don't owe them anything. I'm not going to tell them thanks." And she was telling people out there, "I'm also telling you out there, you shouldn't say thanks to these people and expect a lot more of this." There's still millions of people that have been activated to the point where they will not flip over. And then there's also millions of more that were ticked off and saw the reaction that people had post 2016 election that will not just accept anything that's been written in this Time article and just think things are going to go back to kumbaya. But I think me and Stephen are here going to be in the middle, continuing having conversations like this. And then the people, again, who are willing to engage in conversations. And it's different to say, I admit I was wrong. I admit that I was false in the past. Let's see what's different. But at the same point, don't expect anyone to forget the things that people were doing in the past.
No, and it's like the same thing with the media. It's like, you can't relentlessly attack Trump over every little thing for 4+ years, kiss Biden and Kamala's asses, and then say to me, "Oh yeah, we're unbiased." It's like, guys, I remember this stuff. It wasn't that long ago, And then it's like, why don't people trust the media? It's like, well, you've showed your true colors. It's like there's no undoing that now. I'm not going to forget everything I saw in the past 4 years and pretend like somehow things have changed now. Because they didn't CNN say something about that, about like, I think you mentioned it too, about like, oh, we're going to cover this differently or something, or oh, don't worry, we're going to be hard on Biden's administration. No, you're not. I mean, I saw how they were during the whole election season. It's like, I know what they're all about. I know what they say. It's, I know what to expect. It's like, unless CNN is bought up by someone else, they fire all those people and get new staff. I know what's going to happen.
Yeah. They came out and said Trump was unprecedented, so we needed to be activists. They came out and said, after that, I think it was someone on CNN, might have been Acosta, came out and said, okay, now that Trump is out, like if it's Biden, it's a different kind of thing. We can get these people who are just coming out and saying like, it's just a relief now to be in a press corps, in a press room where people are just treated in this kind of way, in this nicer kind of way. And there was a thing coming out with a leak that Biden's team was asking for the questions ahead of time. It's like, oh, that's just a normal thing. People we all kind of live together and we see each other at lunch. And when you're not actually in the press room, you're still in the same kind of areas in the White House and people go back and forth. And the Biden team's like, we just want to be more prepared. We don't have to keep saying circle back. So we kind of want to know the answers. And I think people kind of know that that's kind of the thing that people did. But I guess that didn't happen as much during Trump's time and things like that. But then you have something like recently, there was somebody who writes for Axios who was dating, it's a female reporter for Axios. She was dating one of Biden's primary press people, is a male. And then that came out with a story like, okay, this is kind of improper. Like, why are you dating this person and reporting on the Biden campaign? And then supposedly Axios was like, oh, she's not doing it. And they're like, okay, she actually is doing it. But then we transferred her to cover the progressives in politics, the progressives in Congress, and Kamala Harris's campaign instead of Biden, because this guy was a primary guy for Biden. And then now it comes out that this male individual who was with Biden's team, threatened some other female reporter in Axios who was going to write on this story, or I think Axios or some other, it was Politico, I think, was writing the story, and he supposedly came out paraphrasing, was like, I'm going to destroy you. You're just jealous that this other guy wanted to have intercourse with the person he's dating instead of you. You just want to destroy his life. This is stuff that's being reported by Politico and people like that. So that's people on the left. You were the left leaning. Biden also came out and was quoted saying, if I even hear that you've mistreated a colleague, you're fired immediately. That's news that I read that story earlier on today. Let's see when it happens and things like this. I'm thinking, from my knowledge of pre-Trump politics that had made me so just disillusioned and being like, I'm done following politics. I don't really care about this stuff anymore. Nothing's really going to change. I'm going to focus on just personal kind of things and things in my sphere. That nothing's going to happen because I didn't see anything happen with Obama. Let's see what happens here. But if we're going back to like, especially pre-Obama politics, because with Obama, I was like, he's not going to change what was in there. But there's a chance. But then I realized there was even more of a protection. But even if we go back to that pre-Obama thing, you're about to see some stuff. or actually, more accurately, you're about to not see some stuff in the stuff that's hidden and the stuff that's not done.
All right, I think.
So anything else?
No, I think that's it for that section, right?
Okay, so that's it for the section, and that's in the second part. This one we went over strange bedfellows, I think. No, we didn't go over strange battlefield. We went people power and spreading the word, right?
Yeah.
I think those are the two things that we did.
Yeah,
And we
people
tried to
power
keep
was the
these
last
in
one.
our piece. And we have at least 2 more parts to go because there's 4 more sections to go here. And I've seen the last section is just a couple of paragraphs. And I've said this every time that we've done at the end of these. And then the other one is 5 or 6, so that might take one in itself. Yeah, I think we can do the next 2 together, and then like the last 2 at once. So you want to do those tomorrow?
Yeah, we'll do that tomorrow.
Okay. So thank you, guys, gals, and everything else in between for listening to this. If you haven't checked out the rest of the series, please feel free to check those out. There's also other conversation series and other content here. Anything else you want to say to the peoples?
That's all I have.
Okay, so that's it for now. Till next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.